Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger from the Schiller Institute. Welcome to our webcast today with our founder and president, Helga LaRouche. It's February 26th, 2020. Helga, in the last couple of days, you've been warning that we're on the verge of a financial crisis, financial collapse, and still walking toward an increasing war danger. You described it as sitting on a powder keg. And you said the financial crash would not be due to the coronavirus, although that might be a trigger. So, what is the cause of this financial crash that you're looking at?
Well, I think it is the result of the long-term erosion of the real economy by the methods of the neoliberal liberal system. But I would like to say a couple of things about this corona question, because I think it will dramatically increase. We have a situation where now many people are talking about that the pandemic probably cannot be prevented. We have a situation where in Italy, in Lombardy region, de facto measures are being taken like in Wuhan or Hubei province in China for the last several weeks. With other words, everything is closed down. People are told to stay home, um, especially because they expect 300,000 uh, infected cases at least, but they only have 4,000 in, uh, emergency hospital beds. So it's now spreading. Also, they have now the medical team from China has just issued new figures, which I think are very interesting, namely that the infection rate of people infected with the coronavirus under 19 is practically zero. People up to 50 years of age, the infection rate is 0.3%. People of 70 and older is 8%, and people above 80, it's 15%. So if you look at that, also the fact that people have been tested, people have no symptoms, the testing has not occurred in many places. There was a complete delayed reaction by some of the European authorities. This has been mentioned today even by some experts in the official Deutschlandfunk radio. I think that the spread of this is probably already out of control, and it will mean that incredible emergency measures have to be taken. Now, I don't think it's a reason for people to panic, because the solution is absolutely there, but it does require a rather radical reversal of the way how things went in the last several decades. I think we need a package, what the Schiller Institute and Lyndon LaRouche have been advertising for a long time. You absolutely need to end this direction of, the shareholder value society, profit maximization, money makes money, outsourcing into cheap labor production places, just in time production, an absurd globalization in terms of the division of labor in terms of production. And I think we have to return to the idea of food security in every country. This is a demand by the farmers everywhere, because they have not been paid anywhere close to what they need to even have the parity price for their own production. We need a parity price for agriculture. We need to go back to sovereignty. We need to have food security, energy security, and basically go back to the idea of sovereign principles in the economy. Now that is coming as a shock to many, but all of a sudden, such people like Bruno Le Maire, who's the French finance minister, who's a arch liberal globalist, if you want so, even he said that this coronavirus will be a game changer. And I find it extremely interesting that the present head of the Kiel World Institute, or the Institute of World Economy, Gabriel Feldmeier, basically also in a statement of today said that this coronavirus in all likelihood will mean a Lehman Brothers moment. Now, remember that when Lehman Brothers went bankrupt in September 2008, there was a shock in the international financial community because they thought that the whole system will completely disintegrate. And it was on the verge of that. But as we know, the central banks then did not do anything to remove the causes of this crisis, but they just went into absolutely insane money pumping, quantitative easing, negative interest rates, and that is going on up to the present time. Now, that is not going to continue. I mean, we know that the financial system is on the brink of collapsing even without the coronavirus. But now, if you have measures which interrupt the international production and trade chain, because you have to have maybe a short time suspension of the Schengen Agreement. Maybe you have to go back to testing at the border, passports, temperature, health symptoms, and you may not be able to maintain the present kind of globalist trade mechanisms. So that is a moment of crisis, and this, as I said, it's not a reason to have panic, but we have to have a different approach. Now, I have called already on the 3rd of January, following the assassination of the Iranian General Soleimani, that an international emergency summit must take place on the level of, at that time, Trump, Xi Jinping, and Putin to prevent the escalation of the Iran crisis. In the meantime, about 10 days later, President Putin made a similar proposal, this time not calling for these 3 countries, but to call for the governments of the 5 UN Security Council members, that they must have a summit and then discuss about what kinds of structures and values must give itself to maintain order and to create the basis for a future. Now, this is what needs to be on the agenda right now. And Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov yesterday reiterated that and said that Russia is in full preparation for such. We are organizing interviews with the Schiller Institute to define the agenda of what must now be the kind of implemented to prevent an otherwise out of control situation from going into chaos.
It seems that one of the things you're saying is that the financial crisis itself, due to neoliberal policies, is making the pandemic much worse, or the potential of a pandemic worse. Now, President Trump and the World Health Organization and others have praised China for their actions. But yesterday, once again, Secretary of State Pompeo attacked China. What is China doing? And you say this is going to be the policy in Italy. Are the Italians following the China model?
Well, I think China did the only possible thing you can do when you are confronted with a potential pandemic. The head of the World Health Organization said repeatedly that China, in dealing with the coronavirus, has created a new international standard of what is required. As you know, they put 60 million people in Wuhan and another big city in Hubei province quarantine for several weeks. It's on. People were told they have to stay home, that per family they can only go buying food every second or third day. They have erected, I think altogether, about 20 new top hospitals in 2-3 weeks. They have sent 26,000 health workers into this region, and they have contained the virus in Wuhan. The rate of infection is going down. The number of people who recover is growing in compared to newly affected ones. and the spread to the rest of China is also going down. So I think China is on the verge of combating and defeating this. They also have restarted the economic activity, and for the first quarter, the GDP growth in China will be probably only 0%, but one can expect that they will recover that very quickly and even compensate for some of the losses. Now, China has done that with an extremely dirigist approach. President Xi Jinping had a hands-on policy. He was absolutely meeting with all relevant responsible authorities all the time, and he conducted this as a personal responsibility, and it worked. Now, I think the whole world owes an incredible thanks to China because, China for sure won the rest of the world precious time to work on preparation, on working on vaccines, which we don't have yet, but, these things all take time. So I think China needs an absolute praise for what they did. And people who attack China are just complete troglodytes, and they should shut up on no matter what level they are, because China has helped to save the rest of the world and has done the world an incredible favor. Now, it remains to be seen if the Western countries will be able to cope with that in the same way, because I cannot see how Germany or Italy or any other country like that will be able to build a hospital in a week. I think the fact that Germany has not been able to build the Berlin airport for now 9 years or so has become the laughing stock of the whole world. So a lot of habits which have developed in Germany and other Western countries just have to be scrapped, and we have to go back to a completely different approach, like a crash program. Also, because of these liberal policies, profit orientation, we don't have the kind of emergency hospital beds. I think we are nowhere in a position to deal with that, but it is just a complete wake-up call that we really have to go back to ways which used to be the case when the German economic miracle was done, where we also knew how to build things. And I think this is now the moment to do exactly that and do away with a lot of really silly uh, rules and um, these things which slowed things down. And I think that is now the moment to really go back to a different economic approach for the sake of the common good of the people.
You mentioned Le Maire of France talking about this as a game changer in globalization. It would seem that this is the ideal time then to adopt your husband's proposal around the four power agreement that would be move toward a new Bretton Woods and his four laws. Is that what you're thinking should be taken up at this emergency summit?
Yes, I think that we need uh, a new paradigm on many levels. The four laws, which were suggested by my husband already several years ago, are the absolute necessary first precondition to accomplish that. He has called for a global reintroduction of Glass-Steagall, a separation of the banks. This is absolutely necessary to end the casino economy, to put the commercial banks under state protection so that they can start serving the real economy once again. Then if the investment banks have red colors in their books, red numbers in their books, and then that's too bad if they cannot count on taxpayers' money anymore. And if they don't figure it out how to survive, then they should declare insolvency. Then naturally you need a return to a national banking system. In Germany, we had the Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau, the credit institution for reconstruction in the post-war period, which was modeled on the Reconstruction Finance Corporation of Franklin D. Roosevelt, that could be a model which could be implemented and extended immediately. You need a national bank in every country, and then these national banks must be connected through a credit system, a new Bretton Woods system, which organizes large-scale, long-term interest, low interest rate credits for production in international projects. If we do that and we cooperate with the new Silk Road in the development of Africa, in the development of Southwest Asia, the development of the Balkan countries, and restart the infrastructure in all countries which has been neglected. I think we absolutely can reverse that, but it does require such an absolute determined intervention, and it only can come from the top governments in the world, because they have to basically put this through against the efforts by the City of London, by the Wall Street, which will be absolutely determined to prevent this from happening. And that is why you need these top governments, because only they together have the power to do that.
And I would assume in dealing with this locust crisis, which is also spreading, you would need the same kind of cooperation.
Yeah, I want to say a couple of words about that, because, I find this, I mean, if we cannot help Africa to deal with this locust question, we have lost the moral fitness to survive. Now, I think this locust question is very telling, because there were already press conferences by the FAO last year warning that these locusts were spreading, but there was absolutely no international media attention. So these locusts multiply, and they are now in Ethiopia, Eritrea, Kenya, spreading to Sudan. They're already eating every day as much as 35,000 people need per day. They are expanding 150 kilometers per day, and it is estimated that if they are not being stopped now through spraying and adequate means, they will multiply 500 times until June, and they will become a full-fledged plague, threatening the life of millions and millions of people. Already now, 30 million people are said to have food insecurity, which means they are starving. And the fact that nothing has been done shows that there is still this absolutely racist colonial mindset on the side of the Europeans and the West in general, because the FAO last week said they only needed $76 million, which is peanuts. The EU gave $1 million. Pompeo, when he was in Ethiopia, promised 8 million. I mean, this is ridiculous. Bloomberg spends 400 million in 1 month for his stupid advertisement campaign to buy the White House, and they cannot put up 76 million. This is the absolute demonstration that the West still is governed by the racist colonialist mindset, and they couldn't care less if Africa dies. And we have to reverse that, because I have said since many years that the attitude of the West towards Africa is a mirror of our own moral behavior and a test for our own survivability. If we can't solve that, we will not survive. So I'm appealing to all of you, help us with this mobilization, not just on the locust, which could be solved relatively easy. You just, organize together with the African governments some corps of engineers of some, Bundeswehr and Blue Helmet and various organizations, and you just spray these locusts, and you could solve it. But it requires the kind of change in attitude, and that can only come from the larger solution, which I just mentioned, which is, the summit on the highest level of Russia, China, India, the United States, and then other countries can attach themselves to it. And there must be a series of conferences dealing with these questions very, very quickly. But we have reached a point where we have to dramatically change course, or we will not make it as a civilization.
At the beginning of the program, we mentioned the other crisis is the war danger, the sleepwalking in the war. Recently, there have been war games. You have the NATO maneuvers underway. What can you say about that?
Well, I think President Trump is for sure trying to have a good relationship with all of these countries. I think people who are in an anti-Trump frenzy, as the German carnival just demonstrated again in an absolutely disgusting manner, I think Trump is trying to have peace with Russia, with China, with India for that matter. Uh, but in his own administration, there are clearly neocons who are absolutely identical with the Democrats. There is no difference between Pompeo, Esper, Nancy Pelosi, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders. They are all on this absolutely anti China, anti Russia frenzy, which was again demonstrated in the Democratic debate last night, where they tried to outdo themselves. Who hates China more? Who hates Russia more? And I think it was Bloomberg who even went so far to say that Russia is supporting Bernie Sanders because if Bernie Sanders is the counter candidate against Trump, then Trump will win. Now, you have a convoluted mind there if you ever have seen one. But these people are dangerous. I mean, they are the real warmongers, not Trump. Esper, for example, just made a so-called mini war game where they rehearsed a scenario whereby supposedly Russia would attack the West with a limited number of low-yield nuclear weapons. Then the US would, or the West would answer that, and then basically they would stop. Now, first of all, it would not stop. I think that there are enough military writers uh, like Ted Postol or Hans Christensen who have made convincing arguments that it is the nature of nuclear war that once you start to use nuclear weapons, the entire arsenal will be used because it's a different logic than conventional war. Also, the fact that the US has now installed these low yield nuclear weapons on submarines and other places has increased the war danger dramatically because it lowers the threshold, the difference between conventional and nuclear war. Then one has to see that all of this is naturally taking place in the context of the largest NATO maneuver since the end of the end of the Cold War period, where troops are at the Russian border in the Baltics, in Poland, in other places, rehearsing the conflict with Russia, despite the fact that they say it's not against Russia, which is absurd to even try to maintain. So this is very, very dangerous. And I think, the only answer to that can really be to leave NATO. I think Germany, France should leave NATO because Trump himself had made very critical remarks about NATO. Macron had said NATO is brain dead, and I think there is right now absolutely no guarantee that NATO represents the security interest of any of the member countries, but it is a very provocative institution. And there is a big debate right now in France to go back to the Gaullist tradition and just not be part of NATO anymore. And I think that that is the only conclusion one can see out of these provocations. Because if you had a limited nuclear war, and there are some people who think you can have one and win it, I think that that would be the end of civilization.
Now we're seeing a growing turmoil inside Germany, both in terms of the political side of things with the Christian Democrats, the killings this last week in Hanau, and this other incident, which I don't think we've figured out exactly what that is. What's going on in Germany?
Well, I think Germany is clearly reaching potentially ungovernability because, I mean, I wrote an article commenting on this Hanau mass murder, which naturally is absolutely despicable. This was a racist Nazi attack on Muslim people in shisha bars. But if you look at the memorandum of this murderer, it has the same references like the murderers of Christchurch in New Zealand, El Paso, Texas, um, Halle a couple of weeks ago, months ago, which all, apart from racism, I mean, this guy in Hanau wants to eliminate all of India and many other colored people, but it also had this idea of the green apocalypse, that the world is coming to an end and that therefore you have to get rid of certain people like Indians and others, all reflecting the apocalyptic view of the Friday for Future, the green financing the paradigm. Now, I don't know where these people come from. It may be that they're all lone assassins, but there is an environment created where these things are possible because I think the Western society has lost direction. And I think one makes it too easy for oneself if one says, now all the good people have to stand together against these racists. Sure, they have. But if you overlook what is wrong with the Western policy, you don't get the right analysis and you for sure do not get the right answer. Because I found it remarkable that the murder of Hanau just took place 3 days after the Munich West Security Conference ended, which had this time the ominous title Westlessness, meaning a new word creation, supposedly that the West is losing international standing, but also that the values of the West are collapsing, and that therefore, the rules-based order must be defended against Russia and China. I mean, that's what Pompeo and Esper said in Munich. And I made the point, the West is making the rules as they wish. I mean, the DNC changes the rules of the Democratic Party to allow a billionaire in the last phase of the election to come in and buy the White House. Then, the rules are being bent by changing an elected government in Venezuela and, allowing the opposition leader to all of a sudden be the government. The rules are being changed to allow drone assassination of an Iranian general in a third country. It doesn't matter. The rules are just changed. International law is, made exempt whenever you need it. So I think there are all these inconsistencies which really are a reflection of the fact that there is something fundamentally going on wrongly in the West. And what we have seen in terms of this global rebellion since the Brexit, since the defeat of Hillary Clinton, since the Yellow Vests and the general strike in France and the rise of the AfD, and I could add the protest of the farmers in Germany, in Spain, in Holland, in the United States. There are so many people who do not feel that they are represented anymore by their governments, and the trust in the government has been lost. Now that has to be corrected. And, I mean, that is not an easy thing because, as you can see by the present leadership crisis in the CDU, which is dramatic. I mean, Merkel from South Africa just called in by phone and said, oh, let's just reverse the election result in Thuringia because we don't like what happened there. I mean, these kinds of things are accumulating, have accumulative effects that the West is really reaching ungovernability. And unfortunately, the present debate in the CDU with all these new candidates to replace Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer as a CDU chairwoman and Merkel as a chancellor candidate, I have not seen any substantial discussion about what kinds of reforms and what kinds of reorganizations of the system are necessary. And at this point, it's all on the level of just personality and who can win what post. And it's just not going into any substance of the matter. So I think we need a completely different approach. I think we need a profound cultural renaissance in the West, because I don't think that just on the level of changing personalities and it will be addressed. So I think we have a profound existential crisis right now, and it is the moment to go back to completely different values, which fortunately we have, but they have to be reactivated. In Germany, it means the German classical culture. In America, it means the American Revolution tradition, the American Constitution. In Italy, it means the Italian Renaissance. And in other countries, it means also to go back to the high points of their culture. But we need that kind of a change in the approach.
And all of this is a compelling argument for people to join the Schiller Institute and work with us to implement the 4 laws, the 4-power agreement, and so on. Now, Helga, this weekend, this Saturday, there's a very significant event in New York City. Bill Binney, the former technical director from the National Security Agency, is going to be giving a talk titled Rescuing the Republic from the Surveillance State, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It will be live streamed at LaRouche PAC. This is a good time for this theme, isn't it?
This webcast or this meeting, which will be live streamed, it will be, for Europe a little bit late. It will be 11 o'clock in the evening or in the night. But I would urge people, if you are a night owl, look at that. This will be very important because it will address the danger of a global surveillance state. As you say, Binney was the technical director of the NSA, so he knows these systems from the inside. He was one of the people who developed them, and he became a whistleblower when he saw how these systems are being used for the total surveillance of every activity of everybody around the globe. And he will speak about that. He will also speak about the fact that he was told by Trump already in 2017 to meet with Pompeo, which he did. And he told him all the evidence that there is forensic proof that there was no Russian hack and that therefore there was no Russiagate and there was no basis for the impeachment. So Pompeo was sitting on this information, and the whole coup attempt against Trump could have been stopped in 2017. So this is explosive material. It also will have a lot to do with the question of the exoneration of my husband, which I absolutely think is the key to the strategic situation, for reasons which will be discussed, among other things, on Saturday. So please tune in, join our channel, distribute this webcast, get active with us. We need a lot of collaborators right now to implement the solutions, because this is a moment of absolute crisis, and you either use such a moment to turn the situation for the better, or it can also crash against the wall. So get active with us right now. Be optimistic. Solutions are at hand, but it requires a lot of people who really start to work with us right now.
Well, Helga, I know I speak for a lot of people when I say thank you for your optimism, and we'll see you next week.
Yes, till next week.